I translate that as medicine for my mother, Nathan said firmly, holding a food delivery cooler bag still dripping from the torrential Chicago rain. The Pinnacle Corporation meeting room was in complete chaos. On the giant screens, error codes flashed red while executives yelled on the phone with angry Japanese customers. The $50 million contract with Tokyo's largest technology company was falling apart in real time because of a catastrophically incorrect translation. "It can't be real," muttered the IT director, typing frantically. The world's most advanced AI system can't have confused respectful partnership with humiliating submission. Richard Blackstone, a billionaire CEO known for firing people via text message, watched the destruction of his empire with clenched fists. At 52, he had built his fortune by crushing competitors and humiliating employees. Now, a simple mistranslation threatened everything. Nathan Torres, 19, had just delivered sushi to the executive floor when he heard the commotion. The son of Mexican immigrants, he worked 16 hours a day between deliveries and studies to pay for his mother's cancer treatment. His tired eyes immediately caught the Japanese characters on the screens, and the grotesque error that no executive could identify. "Sir, excuse me," Nathan said as he approached. "I think I can help with that." Richard turned slowly, his icy blue eyes scanning the young man's soaked uniform. "Are you kidding me? A food delivery guy is going to solve what our team of Harvard PhD translators couldn't." "Your system translated kudo as subordination when the correct term would be mutual cooperation," Nathan explained calmly. "That's why the Japanese were offended." The silence in the room was deafening. Richard let out a cruel laugh that echoed off the glass walls. "Listen to this, folks. The Japanese food guy thinks he understands international business." Nathan remained motionless, but something in his dark eyes changed. A spark that only people who have experienced hunger recognize. The silent determination of someone who has nothing left to lose. "How much do you want to translate this, genius?" Richard sneered, taking out his Italian leather wallet. $100? $200? $3,000, Nathan replied without hesitation. "That's what I need for my mother's medicine this month." The explosion of laughter was deafening. Executives pointed and whispered among themselves as if they were witnessing the greatest absurdity of their privileged lives. $3,000 for a 19-year-old delivery boy to translate something our million-dollar system couldn't? Richard shook his head, amused. "Kid, you've got guts, I'll give you that. But I'll do better. If you can solve this in an hour, I'll pay you your $3,000. If you fail, you leave here humiliated and never come back." Nathan nodded, his calloused hands gripping the handle of the cooler bag tightly. What Richard and his executives didn't know was that this young mere delivery boy held a secret that would make them swallow every word of contempt. While everyone laughed at his apparent naivety, Nathan maintained a serenity that only exists in those who have weathered much worse storms and discovered that sometimes the greatest strength comes from the very places the world chooses to ignore. If this story of prejudice and underestimation touched you, don't forget to subscribe to the channel to find out how a simple delivery boy was about to teach a billionaire the true meaning of the word humility. Nathan was escorted to an isolated workstation in the corner of the room, like an animal on display. Richard made a point of announcing loudly to all the executives, "Folks, we have entertainment. The food boy is going to show us how to do international business." Laughter echoed as Nathan turned on the computer with steady fingers. $3,000. That was exactly the cost of the experimental chemotherapy his mother, Carmen, needed to have a real chance of survival. The doctors had been clear, without the treatment, she had 2 months at most. "Hey genius," Richard shouted from his leather armchair. "Just to be clear, when you fail miserably, I want you to walk out the front door, in front of all the photographers downstairs covering our crisis. I want the world to see what happens to those who don't know their place." Nathan began typing, his hands dancing across the keyboard with a fluidity that made some executives stop laughing. On the screen, Japanese characters appeared and disappeared in complex sequences that few there could follow. What no one in the room knew was that Nathan Torres was not just a delivery man. The son of Miguel Torres, a former Mexican diplomat who had served as cultural attaché at the Japanese consulate for 10 years, Nathan had grown up bilingual not only in Spanish and English, but fluent in formal and business Japanese. When Miguel died of cancer, the same cancer that was now consuming Carmen, Nathan abandoned his studies in international relations to work and pay off medical bills. "Look at that," murmured a vice president, pointing to the screen. "Does the kid really understand all this stuff?" Nathan was reconstructing the entire structure of the contract, not just correcting the catastrophic translation, but identifying dozens of other cultural nuances that the AI system had completely missed. Every line he typed was a silent demonstration of years of informal education in Japanese business etiquette. Richard watched with growing irritation. The amusement was turning into something uncomfortable. The confident rhythm of Nathan's fingers on the keyboard, the unwavering concentration in his tired eyes, none of it resembled the failure he had orchestrated. Time out. Richard shouted after only 20 minutes. Enough of this charade. Call security. Sir, Nathan interrupted without looking up from the screen. I still have 40 minutes. And I've just identified why you've lost 3 other contracts this year. The silence was deafening. Nathan had touched on a real sore spot. Pinnacle had indeed lost important business with Asian companies, but no one had been able to identify why. Your translation systems, Nathan continued, finally looking up, can't distinguish between hierarchies of respect in business Japanese. You've been using casual language with CEOs who expect formal treatment. It's like greeting a judge by calling him dude. Richard rose slowly, his face red with anger. You're making this up to impress me. Number 19-year-old knows these subtleties. Nathan saved the file and turned in his chair. My father spent 10 years negotiating cultural agreements between Mexico and Japan. I grew up translating documents at the dinner table while other kids watched cartoons. I learned that in international business, a comma in the wrong place can cost millions. The room was now completely silent. Executives who minutes earlier had been openly mocking him now exchanged uncomfortable glances. Liar, Richard growled. If you're so qualified, what are you doing delivering food? Nathan smiled for the first time, but it was an empty smile, laden with bitterness. Because when my father died of cancer at age 45, we discovered that health insurance doesn't cover everything. And when my mother was diagnosed with the same disease, I chose to work 16 hours a day instead of finishing my degree in international relations at Northwestern. The impact of the words was physical. Some executives lowered their eyes, suddenly interested in their expensive shoes. Richard, however, doubled down on the cruelty. How touching. A tearjerker to justify your invasion here. But that doesn't change anything, you're still just a cocky delivery guy. Nathan returned to the computer and, with 3 clicks, opened a window that made several people gasp. A detailed financial report appeared on the screen showing the exact losses Pinnacle had suffered from incorrect translations over the past 2 years, $87 million. You lost all that, Nathan said calmly, because you treated translation as technology when it is art. And art requires heart, not just algorithms. Richard was now visibly nervous, but his arrogance would not allow him to back down. Finish what you started then, genius. 40 minutes to save a $50 million contract, or you walk out of here the failure you were always meant to be. As Richard uttered these venomous words, Nathan maintained a calm that intrigued everyone present. There was something in his posture, a serenity that only exists in people who have faced real loss and discovered reserves of strength they didn't even know they possessed. Each new humiliation only fueled a silent determination growing within him, not just to prove his competence, but to show that true intelligence doesn't need expensive titles or skyscraper offices to manifest itself. What those privileged executives failed to realize was that each insult was writing its own lesson in humility, and that the young man in his simple uniform was about to teach them something that no elite business school could ever teach them. The real value of knowledge comes from necessity, not privilege. Nathan returned to the computer with a calmness that disturbed Richard more than any cry of revolt. As he typed, his hands revealed the confidence of someone who had spent years translating diplomatic documents at the dinner table with his father Miguel. Guys, place your bets. Richard shouted to the executives. How long until the food boy gives up? I give him 5 minutes before he starts crying. Laughter echoed again, but something strange happened. On the main screen in the room, numbers began to appear, financial data that no one had asked Nathan to access. Loss reports, canceled contracts, a digital trail that Pinnacle Corporation thought was well hidden. How the hell did he get into the financial system? Muttered the IT director, frantically checking his access permissions. Nathan had learned more than Japanese from his father. Miguel Torres wasn't just a diplomat, he was an expert at detecting inconsistencies in international agreements. He had taught Nathan to read between the lines, to identify when numbers didn't add up, when stories didn't hold water. "Mr. Blackstone," Nathan said without taking his eyes off the screen, "may I ask a question? Why has your company lost exactly $87 million in incorrect translations over the past 2 years, but your annual reports only mention operational adjustments?" The silence was absolute. Richard felt the blood freeze in his veins. Those numbers were confidential, known only to the executive board. "You are not authorized to access this information," he shouted, lunging toward the computer. "Actually, I am," Nathan replied calmly. "When you gave me access to the translation system, you forgot that diplomatic translators need to verify the authenticity of documents. I learned to track financial discrepancies before I even learned to drive." It was at that moment that Nathan's phone vibrated. A message from an international number with a Japanese code. "Nathan Torres? This is Hiroshi Tanaka, CEO of Sakura Technologies. Your father Miguel helped me a lot years ago. I heard you are having problems with our translation. I can help." Nathan smiled for the first time since entering the room. Sakura Technologies was the very Japanese company with which Pinnacle was trying to close the $50 million deal. And Hiroshi Tanaka had been his father's mentor during his diplomatic years. "Interesting," Nathan said aloud, still typing. "Mr. Blackstone, did you know that Hiroshi Tanaka, CEO of Sakura Technologies, knew my father personally?" Richard stopped mid-stride, his face turning from red to white in seconds. "He just sent me a message asking if I need help resolving this awkward situation," as he called it. Apparently, Sakura is considering whether it really wants to do business with a company that treats translation so carelessly. The executives began to exchange nervous glances. Losing the Japanese contract would be catastrophic, but discovering that the food delivery guy had direct connections to the CEO of the partner company was a nightmare none of them had imagined. Nathan took advantage of the moment of confusion to access something that made his heart race. In Pinnacle's digital archives, he found mention of the name Miguel Torres, dated 3 years ago. His father had done freelance work for the company shortly before he died, translating Asian contracts for a fraction of what the big consulting firms charged. And what was most upsetting, Miguel had identified exactly the same errors that were causing millions in losses today. He had sent a detailed report warning about the flaws in the AI system, suggesting specific improvements, and offering his services to implement the corrections. Pinnacle's response had been an automated email: "We appreciate your interest, but we only work with established consulting firms. We do not have any positions available for independent freelancers." Miguel Torres had died knowing he could have saved that company millions of dollars, but he had been ignored because he didn't have the right pedigree. Now, 3 years later, his son was sitting in the same room where that arrogant decision had been made. "Time out," Richard shouted, clearly desperate to interrupt whatever Nathan might be discovering. "I still have 12 minutes, Nathan replied, discreetly saving a copy of the emails exchanged between his father and Pinnacle. "But I've already finished the translation. Do you want me to test if it's working?" Before Richard could respond, Nathan clicked send, and the corrected contract was fired directly to Hiroshi Tanaka. In perfect Japanese, it included not only the correct translation but a personal note explaining that he was Miguel Torres' son and was honoring his father's unfinished work. The room phone rang immediately. It was an international call. "Pinnacle Corporation? This is Hiroshi Tanaka. I just received the corrected contract, and I must say I am impressed. The quality is exceptional. I would like to speak with the person responsible for the translation immediately." Richard looked at Nathan, who remained seated calmly, his hands folded in his lap. But there was something different in his eyes now. It was no longer just determination to get the $3,000. It was something much deeper and infinitely more dangerous. As Richard hesitated over how to respond to Tanaka, Nathan whispered just loud enough for him to hear, "My father tried to help you 3 years ago. You ignored him because he didn't have the right last name. Now I've discovered exactly how that arrogance cost the company $87 million. It was at that moment that Richard realized he wasn't just dealing with a young man desperate for money for medicine. He was face to face with someone who had grown up watching how the world treats people who don't fit the expected mold, and who had spent years preparing for the day when he could make a difference. What those privileged executives didn't yet know was that Nathan had just sent Hiroshi Tanaka much more than a simple translation. Along with the contract, he had included a complete copy of the report his father had sent 3 years earlier, proving that Pinnacle had knowingly ignored warnings that could have prevented millions in losses. And now, with 12 minutes left on the clock and an international call waiting, the real education was about to begin. Not about Japanese translation, but about the consequences of judging people by their appearance rather than recognizing their true value. "Hello, Mr. Tanaka," Richard said, trying to maintain his composure, but his voice was already trembling imperceptibly. "We're glad you approved the translation." "Approved?" The Japanese voice sounded confused over the speakerphone. "Mr. Blackstone, I'm calling to congratulate you on finally hiring Miguel Torres for your team. I worked with him for years at the Mexican consulate. He's the best translator I've ever known." Richard's blood ran cold. Miguel Torres? Yes, the young man who signed the translation identified himself as Nathan Torres, Miguel's son. "I must say, the quality is identical to the exceptional work Miguel did for us. In fact, he attached a copy of the report Miguel sent you 3 years ago, warning of exactly the mistakes that cost Pinnacle millions." The silence in the room was deafening. All the executives looked at Nathan, who remained seated calmly, but was now smiling for the first time since he had arrived. "Mr. Tanaka," Nathan continued, picking up the phone, "this is Nathan Torres. My father always spoke very fondly of you. Unfortunately, he passed away 3 years ago, shortly after sending his recommendations to Pinnacle Corporation." "Nathan. My goodness, how you've grown. Miguel always showed me pictures of you. I am deeply sorry for your loss. Your father was an exceptional man. But tell me, why are you working as a delivery man when you clearly inherited his talent?" Richard tried to interrupt, but Nathan continued, "Because Pinnacle completely ignored my father's work 3 years ago. They said they only worked with established consultancies, not independent freelancers. So when my mother was diagnosed with cancer, I had to drop out of school to work." The line was silent for several long seconds. When Hiroshi spoke again, his voice was icy. "Mr. Blackstone, do you confirm that you ignored Miguel Torres' recommendations that could have saved your company millions in losses?" Richard was now visibly sweating. "Mr. Tanaka, I can explain." "No need to explain anything," Hiroshi interrupted. "Nathan, did you also attach the complete history of Pinnacle's financial losses caused by incorrect translations over the past 2 years?" "I did, sir. $87 million in lost contracts, all due to errors that my father had identified and offered specific solutions to correct." Nathan opened his laptop and projected the emails exchanged between Miguel Torres and Pinnacle onto the main screen in the room. Date by date, proposal by proposal, all rejected with condescending automatic replies. He then showed the detailed financial report of the subsequent losses. Each lost contract corresponded exactly to the problems Miguel had warned about. "Impressive," said Hiroshi. "Nathan, I'd like to make you an offer. Sakura Technologies is opening an office in Chicago. How about being our Director of International Communications? Starting salary of $200,000 a year, plus full medical benefits for you and your family." The impact of the words was like a nuclear bomb in the room. $200,000, more than any Pinnacle executive earned, offered to the food delivery guy they had humiliated minutes before. "I gladly accept, Mr. Tanaka," Nathan replied, his voice firm and dignified. "My father would be proud." Richard tried one last desperate gambit. "Nathan, wait. I can offer you $300,000 to stay at Pinnacle." Nathan turned slowly to face Richard, his eyes shining with a mixture of victory and compassion. "Mr. Blackstone, with all due respect, I don't work for people who judge competence by appearance or who ignore talent out of prejudice." It was at that moment that Richard's phone rang. It was his personal assistant. "Mr. Blackstone, the financial journalists are calling. Someone leaked information about the company's losses due to incorrect translations. Bloomberg wants an urgent statement about the $87 million lost." Richard looked at Nathan, who discreetly showed him his phone. He had recorded the entire conversation with Hiroshi Tanaka and had already sent it to 3 major financial news portals. "How dare you?" Richard began, but his voice trailed off when he realized the magnitude of what had just happened. "I learned from my father that the truth always finds a way," said Nathan, getting up and picking up his cooler bag. "He tried to help this company honestly and was ignored. Today, that same arrogance has cost you not only $87 million, but also your reputation in the international market." Nathan walked toward the door, but stopped and turned around one last time. "Oh, Mr. Blackstone, about that $3,000 you promised? You can keep it. Where I'm going to work now, It barely pays for a week's worth of breakfast. The young man left the room, leaving a deadly silence behind him. Richard remained motionless, watching through the window as the first news vans arrived at the building. His empire was crumbling, not because of a natural disaster or economic crisis, but because he had underestimated a 19-year-old boy whom they had judged by his appearance. Nathan rode down in the elevator wearing the same delivery uniform he had worn an hour earlier. But now he carried with him not only the promise of a bright future, but the certainty that he had honored his father's memory in the most powerful way possible. As he walked through the streets of Chicago toward the hospital where his mother was waiting for her medication, Nathan smiled, thinking about how proud Miguel would be. Not only for having obtained the money for the treatment, but for having proven that true intelligence does not need expensive titles to shine. What those privileged executives would never understand was that Nathan's greatest victory was not the $200,000 salary, but having turned humiliation into dignity, prejudice into justice, and having shown that sometimes the sweetest revenge is simply to be exactly who you always were, only in a place where they finally recognize your worth. 6 months later, Nathan Torres was sitting in his new office on the 47th floor of Sakura Technologies in Chicago, reviewing international contracts when his assistant announced an unexpected visitor. "Nathan, there's a man here who says his name is Richard Blackstone. He insists he needs to speak with you urgently." Nathan smiled, looking out the panoramic window at the city that once saw him as just a delivery boy. "Send him in." Richard entered looking visibly defeated, his expensive suit now looking too big on his emaciated body. The last few months had been brutal. Pinnacle Corporation had lost another $200 million in canceled contracts after the translation scandal, and Richard had been forced to resign as CEO. "Nathan, I wanted to apologize in person," Richard said, his voice almost a whisper, "and congratulate you on all you've achieved." Nathan gestured to a chair. "Sit down, Richard. How can I help you?" "The truth is, I've lost almost everything. The company, my reputation, the market's confidence. I'm here because," Richard hesitated, looking down at his hands, "because I wanted to know if you have any openings for a humiliated former CEO who has finally learned the value of people." The request sounded pathetic, but Nathan sensed genuine sincerity for the first time in the man's voice. "Funny you should say that. I just received a proposal to expand our corporate ethics department." Richard's eyes lit up with a spark of hope. "But," Nathan continued, "the position is junior assistant. Starting salary of $60,000 a year. Very different from your former standards." "I accept," Richard replied immediately. "I need to rebuild who I am, and maybe working with you will teach me what I should have learned a long time ago." Nathan nodded. "You can start Monday. Your first task will be to translate basic documents under supervision. You'll learn on the job that competence has no color, social class, or surname." When Richard left, Nathan called his mother. Carmen Torres was at home, officially cancer-free after 6 months of experimental treatment that his new job had financed. "Son, you won't believe it," Carmen said excitedly. "You received another offer today. Northwestern University wants you to give lectures on intercultural communication." Nathan smiled. 3 universities had already made similar offers. His case had become an example of how talent overcomes prejudice when it encounters fair opportunities. The following week, Nathan received a call from Hiroshi Tanaka with extraordinary news. "Nathan, we have an offer from Honda and Sony for you to lead their expansion in the Americas. $500,000 a year, plus profit sharing." Nathan almost dropped the phone. "Mr. Tanaka, this is..." "It's the recognition you deserve, young man. Your father would be proud to see his son turning prejudice into opportunity." That weekend, Nathan returned to the hospital where his mother had been treated, this time to inaugurate the Miguel Torres Fund, a foundation that offered scholarships to low-income youth interested in translation and international relations. During the ceremony, Richard appeared discreetly at the back of the auditorium. He was no longer the arrogant CEO, but a broken man learning to rebuild his humanity one day at a time. On stage, Nathan held the microphone with the same calm he had shown on that rainy night at Pinnacle Corporation. "My father always said that the most powerful words are those that connect different worlds," he told the packed audience. "Today I prove that he was right. The best translation is not of languages, but of prejudice into opportunity, of humiliation into dignity." Applause echoed as Nathan watched his mother in the front row, radiant and healthy. Next to her was a photo of his father, Miguel Torres, finally recognized as the visionary he always was. 3 years later, Nathan Torres was regional director of the world's largest translation company, an international speaker, and author of a best-selling book on overcoming adversity. Richard Blackstone worked as his assistant, a position he accepted with gratitude and which taught him more about leadership than decades of running a corporation. The story of the young delivery boy who humiliated a billionaire became a symbol that true intelligence cannot be bought at expensive universities, but is forged in necessity and manifests itself when we least expect it. Nathan learned that the best revenge is not to destroy those who have hurt you, but to build something so great that they spend their entire lives trying to understand how they underestimated your abilities so much. If this story of justice and overcoming adversity has inspired you, subscribe to the channel and leave a comment. Have you ever been underestimated because of your appearance? How did you react? Sometimes, our greatest humiliation is just the springboard to our greatest victory.